Today we will conclude the series on the successful student, which has turned out to be much longer than I thought it would be. So far, twice as long as the successful family. Today's class will be on gender dynamics, graduation and lifelong learning. And we're going to chant Srimad Bhagavatam, 7th Canto, Chapter 12, text number 15. Agnau Gura Vatmanicha Sarva Bhuteshvadhokshajam Bhutai Svadharma Bhipashyed Apravishtam Pravishtavat Agnau in the fire, Gurau in the spiritual master, Atmani in oneself, Cha also, Sarvabhuteshu in every living entity, Adhokshajam, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who cannot be seen or perceived with the material eyes or other material senses. Bhutai, with all living entities. Swadharmabi, along with His Lordship's paraphernalia. Pashyet, one should see. Apravishtam, not entered. Pravishtavat, also entered. Translation: one should realize that in the fire, in the spiritual master, in oneself, and in all living entities, in all circumstances and conditions, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vishnu, has simultaneously entered and not entered. He is situated externally and internally as the full controller of everything. Purport: realization of the Supreme Personality of Godhead's omnipresence is the perfect realization of the Absolute Truth, to be attained through the study of the Vedic literatures. As stated in the Brahma Samhita, Andantarasta Paramanu Chayantarastam, the Lord is situated within the universe, within the heart of every living entity, and also within the atom. We should understand that whenever the Supreme Personality of Godhead is present, He is present with all His paraphernalia, including His name, form, associates, and servants. The living entity is part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and thus one should understand that since the Supreme Lord has entered the atom, the living entities are also there. One must accept the inconceivable quality of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, for no one can understand from the material point of view how the Lord is all-pervasive and yet is situated in His own abode, Goloka Vrindavan. This realization is possible if one strictly follows the regulated principles of ashrama, brahmachari, grihastha, vanaprastha, and sannyasa. Srila Madhvacharya says in this regard, Apravishta sabhagata pravishtas tanurupavan evam dvi rupa bhagavan harir eko janardanaha. The Supreme Personality of Godhead in His original form has not entered everything, apravishta, but in His impersonal form He has entered, pravishta. Thus He has entered and not entered simultaneously. This is also explained in the Bhagavad Gita 9.4, wherein the Lord says, Maya tatam idam sarvam jagat avyakta murtina matstani sarvabhutani nachaham teshvavastitaha. By me in my unmanifested form, this entire universe is pervaded. All beings are in me, but I am not in them. The Lord can defy Himself. Thus there is variety and unity, ekatvam bahutvam. Om Jnana Tamarandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivas Adi Gaur Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Sean, do you want to open that door just so we can make sure we hear the buzzer if it goes off?
Just a jar.
Just a jar, just a bit, maybe half. Yeah, it's good, thank you. Translation again, one should realize that in the fire, in the spiritual master, in oneself and in all living entities, in all circumstances and conditions, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vishnu, has simultaneously entered and not entered. He is situated externally and internally as the full controller of everything. We're hearing here about the goal of education, which is summarized as Achintya Bheda Bheda Tattva, as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has taught us. Supreme Personality of Godhead is simultaneously one with and different from his energies. So you may remember when we were discussing the 4 seed verses of the Srimad Bhagavatam recently in the 2nd canto, Lord Krishna explained this principle to Lord Brahma as being the Prayojan Tattva, or the ultimate goal of knowledge. So that's what we're getting here in the context of this presentation here of the Brahmachari by Narada Muni. This is the second to last verse in his presentation of the Brahmachari ashram. Because this is the goal of education, to understand how the Supreme Personality of Godhead is simultaneously entered and not entered everything. In other words, he's all pervading. He's simultaneously one with everything and also different from everything. So in order to actually realize that, as Narada Muni is instructing in this verse, one should realize these things. One actually has to attain prema bhakti, or pure love for Krishna. Because when there's love, then one sees the beloved everywhere. One is always absorbed in thoughts of the object of love. That's true in the relative sense, and it's certainly true in the absolute sense. So that feeling that people have when they think that they're in love and they're just always absorbed in thoughts of the object of love, and whatever they see reminds them of the beloved. That is a very diluted, perverted reflection of love of God. When one actually has love for Krishna, then one sees Krishna everywhere, because Krishna is present everywhere, either in his impersonal form as his energies, or in his personal form, Ishvara Parama Krishna Satchidananda Vigraha. So one can see Krishna in both forms through the eyes of love, as Lord Brahma says, Premanjana Charita Bhakti Vilochanena. Premanjana, the salve of love. Churita means tinged. Premanjana Charita Bhakti, love or devotion, and Vilochanena, one sees. So when one has prema bhakti, then one's eyes are tinged with the salve of love, Anjana, 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 everything through that vision. So because Krishna is the ultimate object of love, that vision is all pervading. So this is the goal then for the successful student, to develop prema bhakti, and that, generally speaking, we can say would take a lifetime. So that may take a lifetime of learning, and therefore, although we're going to hear in this section about the graduation of the student from the Gurukula, from the school of the teacher, actually the human being's whole life is supposed to be a learning process, because generally speaking, again, it will take a lifetime to learn to see Krishna everywhere, to develop prema bhakti. So there's that concept in contemporary circles, particularly New Age circles, that life's a learning process. Of course, it's just used to justify sense gratification. No one knows what they're supposed to be learning, but somehow or other everybody thinks they're learning. But in Bhakti Yoga, then there is the lesson given at the beginning. What are you supposed to learn in the human form of life? You're supposed to learn to love God, and therefore to see God in everything. And then, of course, the lesson extends to how to actually develop that vision. So that is the process of Bhakti Yoga, and we've discussed in previous classes the attitude and lifestyle that leads to the goal. All right. So from here we're just going to go back to text number 7, and then again come forward to this text, and then the final text, text number 16. And we get here more instructions on the actions between the genders. The interactions between the genders. We get more guidance here from Narada Muni on that, and he spends a decent part of this section on this point, because it's a very important point. Text 7 to 12. In text 7 he says that a brahmachari, or one who has not accepted the grihastha ashram, family life, must rigidly avoid talking with women or about women, for the senses are so powerful that they may agitate even the mind of a sannyasi, a member of the renounced order of life. Right, so he's picking up from the verse we chanted in the last class, where he said, fully controlling his senses, he, the student, should associate only as much as necessary with women or those controlled by women. Right, so in the purport to this verse, Srila Prabhupada says, Brahmacharya essentially means the vow to not marry or to observe strict celibacy, Brihadvrata. So you may remember in the very first verse of this chapter, Narada Muni said that the student, the brahmachari, should live at the residence of the guru or the spiritual master with a great vow. Right. So that great vow is called Brihadvrata. Brihad means big or great, and Vrata means a vow. So what is the Brihadvrata? It is the vow not to marry but to observe strict celibacy. Right. So that is the ideal for men, is to vow not to marry and just to stay a strict celibate for the duration of one's life. That option is generally not there for ladies, but it is for some of the men in society, generally the vast minority, and that would be particularly true today. Srila Prabhupada goes on, a brahmachari or sannyasi should avoid talking with women or reading literature concerning talks between man and woman. So this includes things you can get online. Right. The injunction restricting association with women is the basic principle of spiritual life. Right? So without that, then there's no question of spiritual life. That's why you may meet so-called spiritual people who have some tinges of the mode of goodness. Maybe they're vegetarian, right? Maybe they don't take intoxication or don't take much intoxication. Only the softer pleasure drugs, right? But then we find that basically all of them won't be following this basic principle of spiritual life, right? Of restricting the association with women or men for the opposite gender. So then there's no question of spiritual advancement, and we'll hear why in a minute. Associating or talking with women is never advised in any of the Vedic literatures. The entire Vedic system teaches one to avoid sex life. The entire Vedic system teaches one to avoid sex life so that one may gradually progress from brahmacharya to grihastha, from grihastha to vanaprastha, and from vanaprastha to sannyasa, and thus give up material enjoyment, which is the original cause of bondage in this material world. Right, so this is why there is the regulation of not mixing the genders, right? Because material enjoyment, which is epitomized in the interactions between male and female, that's the original cause, Srila Prabhupada says, of bondage in this material world. So if you don't restrict it, you're never going to get free from that bondage, right? So this ashram system, brahmacharya to grihastha, grihastha to vanaprastha, vanaprastha to sannyas, that is the, you could say, external form of how to give up that attachment. So therefore one has to move through these various ashrams and in this way give up material enjoyment. He says the word brihadvrata refers to one who has decided not to marry, or in other words, not to indulge in sex life throughout his entire life. So we go to the next verse. Narada Muni says, if the wife of the spiritual master is young, a young brahmachari should not allow her to care for his hair, massage his body with oil, or bathe him with affection like a mother. Right. So in the purport, Prabhupada explains that because generally in the traditional Varnashram culture, the spiritual masters, the teachers, were householders. Right, sannyasis, they would live in the forest. Right. It's not like now, and sannyasis go around travelling, looking for people to help. But in the traditional culture, you would have to go and find them in the forest. Right, like when Dhruva Maharaj asked his mother, where is Vishnu? She said, I've heard he's in the forest, right? The sages, so he took off. So most of the spiritual masters, the gurus, the teachers who had their own school, Gurukula, then they would be householders, and therefore they would have wives. And Prabhupada says in the purport, the relationship between the student or disciple and the wife of the spiritual master or teacher is like that between son and mother. A mother sometimes cares for her son by combing his hair, massaging his body with oil, or bathing him. Similarly, the wife of the teacher is also a mother, Guru Patni, and therefore she may also care for the disciple in a motherly way. If the wife of the teacher is a young woman, however, a young brahmachari should not allow such a mother to touch him. This is strictly prohibited. Right. Then he gives the list of I think it's 7 mothers, 7 kinds of mothers in the Vedic culture. Right. The original mother, the wife of the teacher or spiritual master, the wife of a brahmana, the king's wife, the queen, the cow, the nurse, and the earth. He says unnecessary association with women, even with one's mother, sister, or daughter, is strictly prohibited. This is human civilization. A civilization that allows men to mix unrestrictedly with women is an animal civilization. In Kali Yuga, people are extremely liberal, but mixing with women and talking with them as equals actually constitutes an uncivilized way of life. Uncivilized because it keeps you in the material world. Human civilization is supposed to help you to get out of the material world. It's called in the Sanskrit Aryan, the Aryan culture. Right? Aryan means one who's making progress. Making progress where? Back home, back to Godhead. Therefore, there are these strict regulations about association between the genders. We go to the next verse. Woman is compared to fire, and man is compared to a butter pot. Therefore a man should avoid associating even with his own daughter in a secluded place. Similarly, he should also avoid association with other women. One should associate with women only for important business and not otherwise. And the purport. If a butter pot and fire are kept together, the butter within the pot will certainly melt. Woman is compared to fire, and man is compared to a butter pot. However advanced one may be in restraining the senses, it is almost impossible for a man to keep himself controlled in the presence of a woman, even if she is his own daughter, mother, or sister. Indeed, his mind is agitated even if one is in the renounced order of life. Therefore, Vedic civilization carefully restricts mingling between men and women. If one cannot understand the basic principle of restraining association between man and woman, he is to be considered an animal. That is the purport of this verse. Right? Because animals, they don't have any restriction. They don't have any restriction in terms of association. Similarly, if humans also don't have any restriction, then what is the difference? Just like Prabhupada gives the example of the hog. Whenever the hog feels sexually inclined, he's free to indulge with whoever's around. Doesn't matter whether it's his mother, sister, or daughter. Right? He just doesn't have any discrimination at all. And we see in human society today that happens with people, with people's mothers, sisters, and daughters. Right? Because of this dynamic between the male and the female. The female's compared to fire and the male's compared to butter. You put them together and nature takes its course. Even with one's own mother, sister, or daughter, it can happen. Right? And as Prabhupada explains, even if one is very advanced in restraining the senses, it is almost impossible for a man to keep himself controlled in the presence of a woman, even if she is his own daughter, mother, or sister. Right? Like even in the Vedic house, for householders, grihastas, so family people, the husband and wife, they wouldn't associate, generally speaking, during the day. Only at the beginning of the day and the end of the day for some time. but the house was arranged so that the lady would have the inside of the house with the children, and then the man would have the outside of the house for his business or whatever he's doing like that. So in this way, even in family life, there were these practical restrictions and arrangements so that people don't even unintentionally degrade themselves. We see that today. This happens all the time because of the unrestricted mixing of men and women. Particularly, one of the major factors is because of having women in the workforce, because then men just have to be around women all the time. Right? And so this is just an agitation for everybody. Then you have all these, scandals coming out, politicians and even presidents of huge countries having affairs with their secretary or some lady in the in the government, personal assistant, right? Just like recently in the world news, there's a huge scandal where so many wealthy and powerful and famous people are either directly or indirectly implicated in associating with a man who was the head of a child prostitution ring, a global child prostitution ring. Even members of various royal families in the world are implicated in it. Not that they've necessarily participated in those activities, but just because of their association with the guy, it's just caused so many problems for them. And of course, who knows whether they were implicated in it or not. So it should be obvious that although it seems like a good idea to our Kali Yuga brain for men and women to associate with each other unrestrictedly, it actually just causes so many problems. Right? Even within people's own families, there's child molestation, incest, rape, domestic violence. It's all just because of this. It's the only reason, actually. Of course, people don't have any spiritual knowledge either, but that's the reason that they arrange a society like that. Right? Chintama paramayam cha pralayantam upashitaha kamupaboga parama etavat iti nishchitaha. Krishna explains in the Bhagavad Gita that they believe, they meaning the demoniac, the materialistic, they believe that to gratify the senses is a prime necessity of human civilization, and thus until the end of life their anxiety is immeasurable. That's the result. So much anxiety. So many of the ladies that were involved in this global child prostitution ring, they just kill themselves. Suicide. Either that or their this whole life is just totally ruined. So we may think, oh, this is a bit strict, like what Narada Muni's explaining here. It's a bit full on. But look at the results of not following it, right? You think that's not full on? As Prabhupada said in the previous purport, in Kali Yuga, people are extremely liberal, but mixing with women and talking with them as equals actually constitutes an uncivilized way of life. So you think that's civilization, to have global child prostitution rings with all the leaders of society that directly or indirectly implicated in them? Is that human civilization? So, Narada's given this example of butter and fire. We should take it seriously. Right? And if we don't take it seriously, and we get into trouble, then we can't say that we weren't warned. Right? Because Narada Muni's giving several verses here, like 6 verses or something on this, just to make sure that we get the point. Right? Next verse, as long as a living entity is not completely self-realized, as long as he is not independent of the misconception of identifying with his body, which is nothing but a reflection of the original body and senses, he cannot be relieved of the conception of duality, which is epitomized by the duality between man and woman. Thus there is every chance that he will fall down because his intelligence is bewildered. And the purport Prabhupada says, here is another important warning, that a man must save himself from attraction to women. Until one is self-realized, fully independent of the illusory conception of the material body, the duality of man and woman must undoubtedly continue. But when one is actually self-realized, this distinction ceases. So then he quotes the Bhagavad Gita 5:18. The humble sage, by virtue of true knowledge, sees with equal vision, alerted a gentle brahmana, a cow, an elephant, a dog, and a dog-eater. On the spiritual platform, the learned person not only gives up the duality of man and woman, but also gives up the duality of man and animal. This is the test of self-realization. One must realize perfectly that the living being is spirit soul, but is tasting various types of material bodies. One may theoretically understand this, but when one has practical realization, then he actually becomes a pandit, one who knows. Until that time, the duality continues and the conception of man and woman also continues. In this stage, one should be extremely careful about mixing with women. No one should think himself perfect and forget the Shastric instruction that one should be very careful about associating even with his daughter, mother or sister, not to speak of other women. Okay, so then we go on. Text 11. All the rules and regulations apply equally to the householder and the sannyasi, the member of the renounced order of life. The grihasta, however, is given permission by the spiritual master to indulge in sex during the period favourable for procreation. Right, so it's not that Bhagavatam is against sex life, but it's specifically against illicit sex life. And when there's unrestricted mixing of the genders, then there will inevitably be illicit sex life. All right. And in household life, that's the, as Prabhupada explains, that's the license for sense gratification. If you get a license, then you can legally drive on the road and the police won't pull you over. At least they won't pull you over for not having a license. So, similarly, if you have a license for sense gratification, if you're a legitimate grihasta, then that facility is there and there's no problem. At least there's no problem in terms of the laws of nature. There may be problems, but that particular dynamic of illicit sex life is more or less avoided through it's avoided through the proper use of the activity of procreation. Right? So in the purport, Prabhupada says, it is sometimes misunderstood that a grihasta, a householder, is permitted to indulge in sex at any time. So we do hear this. This does come up, particularly in other parts of the world. He says this is a wrong conception of grihasta life. In spiritual life, whether one is a grihasta, vanaprastha, sannyasi or brahmachari, everyone is under the control of the spiritual master. For brahmacharis and sannyasis, there are strong restrictions on sexual indulgence. Similarly, there are strong restrictions for grihastas. Grihastas should indulge in sex life only in accordance with the order of the guru. Therefore, it is mentioned here that one must follow the orders of the spiritual master, Guru Vrittir Vikalpena. When the spiritual master orders, the grihasta may accept sex life. This is confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita 7.11. Dhammavarudho bhuteshu kamosme. Indulgence in sex life without disobedience to the religious rules and regulations constitutes a religious principle. The grihasta is allowed to indulge in sex life during the period favourable for procreation, in accordance with the spiritual master's order. If the spiritual master's orders allow a grihasta to engage in sex life at a particular time, then the grihasta may do so. Otherwise, if the spiritual master orders against it, the grihasta should abstain. The grihasta must obtain permission from the spiritual master to observe the ritualistic ceremony of Garbhadan Sanskara. Right, so that's the purificatory process that serious householders perform for procreating Krishna-conscious children. Then he may approach his wife to beget children, otherwise not. A brahmana generally remains a brahmachari throughout his entire life, but although some brahmanas become grihastas and indulge in sex life, they do so under the complete control of the spiritual master. The kshatriya is allowed to marry more than one wife, but this also must be in accordance with the instructions of the spiritual master. It is not that because one is a grihasta he may marry as many times as he likes and indulge in sex life as he likes. This is not spiritual life. In spiritual life, one must conduct one's whole life under the guidance of the Guru. Only one who executes his spiritual life under the direction of the spiritual master can achieve the mercy of Krishna. Yasya prasadat bhagavat prasada. If one desires to advance in spiritual life, but he acts whimsically, not following the orders of the spiritual master, he has no shelter. Yasya prasadan nagati kutopi. Without the spiritual master's order, even the grihasta should not indulge in sex life. So, at least to me, that purport's pretty clear. So sometimes we hear this from devotees, practitioners at various levels that, within marriage, it's okay. Well, we have, for serious devotees, purports like this one from Srila Prabhupada. So then we go to text 12. Brahmacharis or grihastas who have taken the vow of celibacy as described above should not indulge in the following: applying powder or ointment to the eyes, massaging the head with oil, massaging the body with the hands, seeing a woman or painting a woman's picture, eating meat, drinking wine, decorating the body with flower garlands, smearing scented oil on the body, or decorating the body with ornaments. These should be given up. Right. So, these are just things that increase the bodily conception of life. So, that's the section about male, female, or gender interactions, and Narada Muni has relayed here in a very straightforward way why those, what would be considered today probably ridiculous restrictions between men and women, are important. History has shown, as we just relayed before, even today, just in the news at the moment, there's this huge political scandal with famous, wealthy, powerful people from all over the world being implicated in a child prostitution ring, a global child prostitution ring. Again, not necessarily that they were directly involved in it, but just due to their association with the man who was the organiser of it, they've become highly questioned, because many of them knew that he was a convicted sex offender, but they still maintained association with him and things. And so history's shown that both for individuals and even for a whole country can be derailed by dealing recklessly with the opposite sex. Actually, you look at the history of like the Roman Empire and various other empires, and actually they became derailed by just overindulgence and this and lust, basically. Lust so powerful that it can just completely overwhelm someone's intelligence. So real education, it trains human beings from a young age so that their judgment won't be so easily obliterated when they reach physical maturity. Any questions on this?
For a brahmachari, or someone that's aspiring to be a brahmachari, like when, say, for example, some Mataji cooks cooks lunch for the brahmachari, is it appropriate or not appropriate to say thank you?
Yeah, one should always be respectful and grateful. But as we heard, association should be very short. Right? Yeah. Brahmachari should be very careful not to mix with women or with men addicted to women. Although when he goes out to beg alms it is necessary to talk with women and with men very much attached to women, this association should be very short, and he should talk with them only about begging alms and not more. Brahmachari should be very careful in associating with men who are attached to women. Right? So again, as we tried to explain the last class, that in one sense associating with men who are attached to women is more dangerous than associating with women themselves, because if the man is educated, then he knows that in the association of the opposite sex he has to guard himself, right? But then in the association of the same gender he can relax, right? So therefore he can leave himself open to becoming contaminated that way, right? So in both cases then that association should be very short, right? So these injunctions are not they're not advising that the man be disrespectful or rough or ungrateful to ladies, right? They're just saying that because just as out of human decency, one is always respectful and grateful to others. But the point is that one should simply keep things very concise, and in that way there won't be any danger. Right. But also the practical point we get here is that I can't find the actual purport, but is that they shouldn't be alone together. Right. So like when the brahmachari goes to beg alms, then he would be outside in public, right, generally, like that. So then in public, around other people, there's some, particularly in the original culture, then there's some social pressure to be sober, right? Other people are around, other people are watching, and that just helps that sobriety. But then when man and woman's alone together, that's when they think nobody's watching, and the mind starts to become more agitated. So that should be avoided. Right. So just in a group setting or like that in public, that's fine. You can say thank you, and that's fine. Yeah, that's nice. So sometimes when men read these things, they become unnecessarily, they take it in a fanatical kind of way in terms of how they deal with the opposite sex. They become very rough and kind of just disrespectful. Right? So that's not what's being explained here. Right? But we're always respectful. If someone has helped us or given us something, served us in some kind of way, then we're always grateful. It's just a question of how and where that is expressed. All right? Does it make sense?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else in this?
What's the restrictions or the guidelines on like time with your daughter?
On
Time with your daughter.
time with your daughter?
Mm-hmm.
As we heard, basically it's one has to be careful. But that's the Bhagavatam standard. There's that verse in the 9th canto that one shouldn't be alone. That's the main point that's mentioned. One shouldn't be alone. Right. With them. You see practically how so many, it's just so unfortunate how so many children are abused by their parents. It's generally not the ladies that are abusing their children, right? So the warning's there. Anything else? Okay, so we go on to text number, was it 13 and 14? So this is about the graduation then of the student. According to the rules and regulations mentioned above, one who is twice born, namely a Brahmana, Kshatriya or Vaishya, should reside in the Gurukula under the care of the spiritual master. There he should study and learn all the Vedic literatures along with their supplements and the Upanishads according to his ability and power to study. If possible, the student or disciple should reward the spiritual master with the remuneration the spiritual master requests, and then, following the master's order, the disciple should leave and accept one of the other ashrams, namely the Grihastha ashram, Vanaprastha ashram, or Sannyas ashram as he desires. Right, so this is a summary of what the student has learnt, and then how he graduates. Generally, he graduates to one of the other ashrams. Occasionally, then, he will stay as a brahmachari for his whole life. Right, that's the Brihad Vrata, the great vow to remain a brahmachari for one's whole life. It's rare, particularly in the Western world, but it does happen even today, and it's probably more possible in India. But generally the man would get married, accept the Grihastha ashram, or he may go to Vanaprastha ashram or sannyas. Right. Prabhupada says in the purport, to study the Vedas and understand them, of course, requires some special intelligence, but the members of the three higher sections of society, namely the Brahmanas, Kshatriyas and Vaishyas, must learn the Vedic literatures according to their capacity and power to understand. In other words, studying the Vedic literatures is compulsory for everyone but the Shudras and Antajas. So Shudras, then, they wouldn't go to the Gurukula because they're labourers, artisans like that, and so it's not necessary for them to learn in a Gurukula what they need to do for their occupation. And often those occupations require a lot of time because they're very practical. So they require a lot of time to learn. So the earlier the boy starts learning it, then the better. You know, like say if someone wants to be a musician or something. So to play classical Indian music, you know, you're talking a long time. It takes a long time to learn, right? So the sooner you start, the better. And then the others, like the Vaishyas, would stay. The Brahmanas would stay the longest time because they have the greatest capacity and power to study. Kshatriyas, but less. Vaishyas, less. Right. The Vedic literature gives the knowledge that can lead one to understand the absolute truth, Brahman, Paramatma, or Bhagavan. Gurukula, or the reformatory educational institution should be used only to understand Vedic knowledge. At the present time, there are many educational institutions for training and technology, but such knowledge has nothing to do with understanding of the absolute truth. Technology, therefore, is meant for the Shudras, whereas the Vedas are meant for the Dvijas. So Dvija means someone who's twice born, Vaishya, Kshatriya, or Brahman. Consequently, this verse states, Dvijo dit yava buddhya cha trayim sango panishadam. At the present time, in the age of Kali, practically everyone is a Shudra and no one is Dvija. Therefore, the condition of society has very much deteriorated. And then Prabhupada explains, one can go from the brahmachari ashram and accept sannyas. It's not compulsory to go through those various ashrams. If one is qualified, one can do that. So that's the graduation then, the student's graduation. And then we get to today's verse. One should realise that in the fire, in the spiritual master, in oneself, and in all living entities, in all circumstances and conditions, the Supreme Personality of Godhead Vishnu has simultaneously entered and not entered. He is situated externally and internally as the full controller of everything. Right, so this then is the goal of education, and if one realises that upon graduation, then great. If not, then one continues one's education throughout the various ashrams, Grihastha, Vanaprastha and Sannyas, and then one can perfect one's human form of life. Ante Narayana Smriti. Right? That perfection means to remember Krishna at the time of leaving the body. And the final verse for this section, by practicing in this way, whether one be in the brahmachari ashram, grihastha ashram, vanaprastha ashram or sannyas ashram, one must always realize the all-pervading presence of the Supreme Lord, for in this way it is possible to understand the absolute truth. So again, that realization is possible when one develops love for Krishna. Then one sees Krishna everywhere and everything. Hare Krishna. Any final questions from anyone? Yeah.
Thank you for class. You mentioned how the Shudras don't go to the Gurukul.
Yeah.
And I think I remember reading that in like in a Varnashram society, the majority of the people are Shudras.
Right.
So maybe 80%, maybe something. That's what I remember. So then I'm wondering if the Shudras don't go to the Gurukul, then I'm assuming they don't learn sense control and, for example, celibacy. So how does that look in the society if the majority of the society is made up of Shudras, but they haven't gone to the Gurukul to learn these principles of austerity and sense control and stuff.
Just means they haven't had a formal education. It's not that they don't learn it, it's just that they don't have a formal education because the capacity for learning is not so great. So therefore formal education is not required, or it's not really going to help them. Right. So when you're saying that most of the society is Shudras, what you're really saying is that a lot of them are women, right? Like over half the population are women, right? So women are educated, but they're not educated in the Gurukula. They're educated in the home. So they'll still learn the same things, but just not with as much depth. Right? Because again, it's like Narada explained, it's according to one's capacity to learn. People have different capacities according to their psychophysical nature. Right? Not everybody has the same capacity for understanding. So that's why I'm saying the Brahmanas then, because they're in the mode of goodness, so then they would stay the longest, because the mode of goodness produces a bigger capacity for learning. And then less than that's the Kshatriyas, they're in the mode of passion. They also have capacity for learning, but it's not as much as the Brahmins. Therefore they don't teach the Shastra. And Vaishya's less, right? And Shudra's less. Right? So that's in terms of education. Everybody would learn the same thing, but it's just a question of how the education is conducted and with a practical consideration of what one's capacity to learn is, and also what kind of occupation they would be performing in society. So if you're going to be a teacher, you have to have a lot of knowledge, right? You can't be spending all your time, down at the beach, kind of, surfing or something all day, and then have a lot of knowledge, right? Can't be playing computer games all day or watching YouTube or whatever. You've got to be studying. So Brahmanas would not just study in the Gurukul, they study for their whole life. Kshatriyas don't have time. They're too busy just dealing with the practical reality of organising and protecting society. Right? Vaishyas definitely don't have time. They're just doing business, farming, like that. And Shudras, they're serving the others, so they don't have time either. Ladies traditionally are homemakers, so they don't have time either. Maintaining a home takes a lot of time. Right? A lot of time, a lot of energy. Looking after kiddies takes a lot of time and energy. Particularly if you've got more than one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so, And Bhakti Thakur had 13 children. Right? He had 2 wives. One of them died at a very young age. I think she had a child. I can't quite remember. But that means the other wife had a minimum of 12 children. Can you imagine that? It takes a lot of time, Where's your time for studying? Right? But obviously we don't have that culture now. And there would always be a cultural, there would be, organised by the Kshatriyas, there would be so many sacrifices and auspicious occasions, festivals and things where everybody would attend. And then everybody would hear from the Brahmins, right? Just like we hear in that, in the Krishna book about the gopis. Prabhupada explains that they weren't born in rich mercantile families, but in the families of agriculturalists, like the cowherd ladies. But they heard all sorts of Vedic knowledge from the Brahmanas. Mr. Prabhupada says that's the Vedic culture. Everybody gets educated. So it's not that the Brahmanas are just educating everybody in the school that goes to the school. They're educating everybody in the society, because not everybody can go to the school. Right? So when there's a sacrifice, when there's an auspicious event, when there's an occasion, a festival, right? When there's a marriage, when there's a funeral, right? And there's the dasa samskaras, the 10 samskaras that a human being is supposed to follow. These are very important events in a human being's life. Then the brahmanas would attend and they will give some knowledge there. So in this way everybody gets what they need. Right. And this is, see, today we don't have this traditional culture. We have the Kali Yuga culture in all its glory. But to make up for that, we have the chanting of the Maha Mantra. And the chanting of the Maha Mantra, if you chant seriously and you follow the regulative principles, that chanting is so powerful it promotes you to the platform beyond the Brahman. It promotes you to the Vaishnava platform. Right? Vaishnava is beyond Brahman. Brahmanas, generally, they only understand the impersonal Brahman. They don't understand Krishna, the personal Brahman, right? The supreme Brahman. And so because we're chanting the Maha Mantra, therefore we're getting that understanding from Krishna that is beyond even the level of a Brahmana. Right? And therefore we become eligible to hear Srimad Bhagavatam, to understand it, right? To participate in all the other activities of Bhakti Yoga. So that's right at the top level of Vedic culture. That's all by the potency of the chanting of the holy name, by the mercy of Lord Chaitanya, Lord Nityananda. Otherwise we shouldn't be here. We're not Brahmins, we're not Kshatriyas, we're not Vaishyas, we're not even Shudras. According to the classic Vedic system explained in Srimad Bhagavatam, we're not even Shudras. We're Panchama, that means the 5th class outside of human civilization. As soon as you start eating cows, you're gone. You're out. Cow killing, that's the greatest sin. As soon as you do that, you're out. You're not even a Shudra. Shudras will eat meat, but they will never eat a cow. Right.
I think this is what I'm trying to understand, is that how the society looks, because mostly Shudras, but they're, for example, eating meat, and I think also remember reading they sometimes drink wine. And
they're Shudras. Not everybody's the same. Not everybody has the same degree of fortune by their karma. So if someone's born as a Shudra, then it means that by their karma, that's the limit of their. That's all the money that they had to spend in that lifetime. Of course, they can improve from there, but obviously their birth is not as fortunate as a birth as a Brahmana. Right? But everybody has the potential, having the human form of life, to elevate themselves. It's just that according to the modes of nature that we take on due to our karma, we're going to have more or less material advantages to that, to that process of elevation. So a Shudra has the less advantage, the least advantage out of the 4, because he's conditioned by the mode of ignorance. The Brahmana has the greatest advantage because he's conditioned by the mode of goodness. Right? But regardless of our conditioning, we can all become Krishna conscious. For some people it'll be easier than others. But ultimately it comes down to sincerity, and that's not a product of our conditioning. See, the thing is, in the Vedic culture, although there were even people outside the culture, like you had the Shudras at the bottom, conditioned by the mode of ignorance, but then you have, like Prabhupada said, the Antajas, or those who were just born outside the culture. Mlechas, Yavanas, it's just like us, right? But because the culture is arranged in such a way by the Kshatriyas, as they've learnt themselves in the Gurukula and as they're being advised by the Brahmins, the culture is such that everybody knows what they should be doing, right? And there are examples of everybody doing what they should be doing according to their varna, right? It's not like today where just kind of anything goes, you know, and it's all good, right? Unless you get caught, you know. It's not like that. And so for Shudra, they're cultured people. If you read the qualities of a Shudra given in the 11th canto of the Bhagavatam, it's very rare to find someone like that today. Right? They're cultured, and they're protected by their whoever was the master. They were treated as a part of the family of whoever they were serving. So they were taken care of, they were protected, they were satisfied in that way by the master. Not like today where, you know, all the Shudras have to have trade unions and, you know, wars and that with their employer and that because they're being ripped off and exploited. They were actually cared for, right, as a part of the family. Like if let's say they work for a Vaishya, right? So they were cared for as part of his family. And the Shudra's whole family was cared for by that employer. Right. So it's not like the individualistic, impersonal culture we have today. And there may be some, because of the nature of the person, likely there'll be some misdemeanors, you know, in terms of controlling the senses, but at the same time, it's corralled or contained to a great degree by the culture itself, which didn't support that. And the person would know, you know, I'm not acting properly. Right? So if they were fortunate, they would then take guidance from the Brahmins and, you know, try to correct themselves. But today, like, who's telling you that? Who's telling you that whatever you're doing is right or wrong? You are. Right? So in other words, social pressure, if it's coming from the mode of goodness, then it's good. It helps the human being, even if he's at a material disadvantage. Right? Whereas social pressure has the value, if people in society have the value of sense control and just attaining a higher goal than wanton, you know, sense gratification and, you know, economics at all cost, then it's good. Everything has a proper use. So even social pressure has a proper use. Whereas you get the opposite today, which is pressure to just, you know, degrade yourself and be proud of it, right? That's the misuse of social pressure. So that was there as well. You see in the example of Mrigari the hunter, Mrigari wasn't even a Shudra, he was a hunter. And not even a hunter that actually just killed animals, he would only half kill the animals. Because he was taught by his father that when you half kill animals, you get pleasure out of it. That's what Narada Muni asked him. He said, I'm just wondering why are you only half killing the animals? He says, my father taught me to do it like this. Yes, I get pleasure from this. I like seeing them in pain. Right? But because he was sincere, he took shelter of Narada Muni, right? He became a great Vaishnava. That's the advantage of having brahmanas in society. Like you, going out and distributing transcendental knowledge. then people get the opportunity, regardless of their misfortune, to, meaning the material misfortune of their birth and the society that they're born in, to actually understand and attain the highest goal of life, which even in the Vedic culture, it would be extremely rare for a Brahmana to obtain. They would generally only attain impersonal Brahman realization. Those are all material, right? That's the point. Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, Mlecha, Yavana. It's all material. Brahmachari, Grihastha, Vanaprastha, it's all material. It's all just in relation to this body, right? But it's Krishna's system for dealing with different material bodies so that they elevate themselves through the modes of nature to Krishna consciousness. Therefore it's the best social system because it's come from Krishna. How much it can be applied today, we have to see. We have to see as individuals, we have to see as a society. But Srila Prabhupada gives a lot of weight to this system. So to the degree that we can understand it and apply it in our own life, we shouldn't be utopian and think we can just take everything that Narada Muni is saying here in detail and just copy and paste it onto our lives or the lives of other, members of the Krishna conscious society. It's a bit naive. But we can take the principles and we can see, how much of this, how do I fit in, and how much of this can I apply. Whatever we can apply will help us. Right? Does it make sense? Yeah. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Granth Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Shri Giriraj Maharaj ki jai. Go Premanandi.